Hey everybody, and welcome back. As you can see, winter is finally here. We had a very long Indian summer, but one very big benefit to the Indian summer was that the more cold resistant plants like the lavender and the rosemary had about an extra month and a half to grow, and they actually got very, very large in that month and a half compared to what they were at the end of summertime. So just the night before it snowed, I went out and harvested all our lavender. I cut it down to about an inch above the ground just to give it a little bit of green for it to die back naturally, so that it'll come back next year. And this is what we were able to get off of two small bushes that were my new bushes. I planted them just this year. You can see what we have left here compared to the size of my hand. Now these have already been drying for a couple of days, just sitting here out on the table, but I'm gonna quick dry the rest of these in the dehydrator so that we can get to infusing our oil. And the same pan here that I am going to be doing the infusing in, I've just turned it into a makeshift double boiler with a nice mixing bowl in there, just sitting on top of the rack so it's up above the water, and that way we can get the coconut oil down to a melted point. If you haven't worked with coconut oil before, coconut oil starts to melt above 70 degrees, and the lower you get below 70 degrees, the more solidified it becomes. So just to make this easier to work with, I want to melt it down to liquid form first. So we'll take in some mason jars and their lids and bands and sanitize them just like we would do for canning. I gave them a wash, and then you can put them in boiling water for at least 10 minutes. And because we're working with oils, I've taken them out and let them completely air dry on a nice clean towel to keep them nice and sanitary. While that oil is melting down, over here we have our lavender that has been completely dried. I always stress that anytime you're making an infusion, an oil, a salve, cream, anything to that effect, you want to make sure that the product that you're using is completely and thoroughly dried, because any moisture that gets trapped in what you're making can cause it to mold or become rancid, and we definitely want to avoid that so that this stores for a really long time, just like a normal oil would do. So we're going to go ahead and start splitting this up into our jars. We've split all the lavender up that we have between the 4 jars. The ratio that you use is up to you. Obviously, the more lavender that you use, the stronger your oil is going to be, and so on and so forth. I do suggest doing a minimum though of a 1 to 10 ratio herb to oil. And now we're going to go ahead and very, very carefully ladle our hot oil into the jars. Make sure not to burn your hands, and you also want to make sure that your oil is not too hot, because you don't want to risk cracking your jars. It's a nice pretty sight at this point, and we went ahead and capped those really tightly with the lids and rings. And just like with the jars, make sure that those lids and rings are very, very dry. We have our large pot here with water in, and I've got a rack for canning that'll just keep it up off the base so the jars don't get too hot on the bottom. We're not going to have this water boiling yet, because just like with the oil, you don't want your jars to crack when you put them in there, or to shatter. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to place our jars right in there. We have just enough water that it's going to come up maybe about halfway or so up the jars. We don't need to completely cover the jars, just a couple inches of water. Now we're going to go ahead and let this water come to a nice simmer, and then we're going to have a whole lot of patience, because we're going to let this sit here in the simmering water for at least 6 to 8 hours. And the closer you get to 8 hours, the stronger your infusion is going to be. And I find this type of infusion to be a happy medium for the waiting time. There is another type of infusion, like the one that we did here with this cleaner up in the corner here, which is going to take more like 4 to 6 weeks rather than 6 to 8 hours. Now that we've let these infuse for the minimum 8 hours, you can see the change in the color that's in there. And we've set ourselves up with some cheesecloth in a bowl over here, a couple layers worth, and we're going to go ahead and strain these out. My suggestion to you is to try to pour off the top of the oil first without the actual herbs, then we'll go back and dump the rest in. And remember to be very careful, because this is hot oil. I do suggest letting your jars cool down for at least a half hour or so before you start pouring this, just so that you don't take a chance of burning yourself. And now that we've decanted those jars with as much of just the pure oil as we can without getting a lot of the herbs in there, we'll dump the rest of these herbs into the cheesecloth, and we will pick it up and we will squeeze it all out the best that we can and get every ounce of that oil out that we can. then this is what you're left with, a nice, pure, wonderful smelling oil that you can go ahead and portion up and jar and get it ready to be stored away. It smells wonderful. You can always put it in the fridge and let it solidify, or it may solidify in your house depending on how cool it is. And you can use this just as is if you want, for wonderful skin treatments and that kind of thing. Otherwise, get it ready to do all kinds of crafting, which we will have some future videos coming up with that, so make sure you keep an eye out. But otherwise, I thank you all so much for watching. If you like this video, definitely please hit that like button, and always think about subscribing, because we're always having a ton of fun over here and sharing what we're doing. But I thank you all for your support. I love you all. Enjoy the rest of your day and your holiday. I will see you in the next one. God bless, and bye-bye.